Hello, I am going to show you how I make a Frankenpen. Now first of all, a Frankenpen is, as the name suggests, a pen that is made up of parts that came from other pens. And a Frankenpen's most important part is of course the nib, and the nibs are Frankenpen. The nibs on Frankenpens are magnificently flexible and quite a joy to write with. And the nibs come from Victorian dip pen nibs, which I fit into more modern fountain pen barrels so that you can actually write with them without having to dip them every single letter. So I will show you how these things work in just one moment, but first I will show you examples of how the Victorian nib in its original manifestation works, or more importantly, doesn't work. So I'll be right with you. Victorian nibs come in beautiful Victorian holders, whether they're ivory or gold fill, mother of pearl, is neither here nor there because everything from this point backwards is not going to be used in our Frankenpen, but they're quite lovely, beautiful pens, and but they have one flaw, and that is that they don't actually hold ink, and you have to dip them, and you write a letter, and then you have to dip it again to finish the letter because there's not a space in this big old glob of pen to actually hold any ink. So fountain pen manufacturers once upon a time decided they wanted to fix that, so they built a pen that had what is called a feed underneath the nib, which fed the ink to the point from a reservoir in the pen, and you never had to dip the pen, you just had to fill it up and you could write for a whole day. However, the nibs on these pens from the 1880s or so are so magnificently responsive that I find that these nibs are too good to sit here quietly in their holders, and I have to put them to work. But for me, I have to set them into a fountain pen barrel. And you would think that would be easy, but it isn't easy, and I'll explain that why it isn't easy in just a moment with a little bit of visual aids. Okay, be right back. Here's a dip pen again, and if you take the dip pen out of the holder, you can see that the shape of the cross-section of the nib at the base is flat at the top. So at that point the nib is shaped like this. A fountain pen nib, on the other hand, is rounded, and the round fountain pen nib fits with a round feed in a round hole. When you try to put a flattened dip pen nib in a round hole with a round feed, you're going to end up deforming the pen nib, and it's going to the tines will crisscross and it just won't write. So what you have to do is you have to find a feed that is slightly smaller than the feed that would have normally fit in that pen, and you set that and the dip pen nib into your loaner pen, into the body of the pen that you're going to use. So that's the first hurdle that you have to do, is you have to find a nib and a barrel that will fit. And gravity slides everything off my desk here. Stay. stay. So, for example, here's a eyedrop fill off-brand pen with its feed, and this feed is going to be too tight for this barrel, so you have to use a thinner feed, looser feed, and then you slide, hopefully, the dip pen nib that you want to use into the barrel, and it will balance nicely. The problem is it's a lot of trial and error to get the right nib and the right feed and the right holder. So that's step one, and that takes a good long time, and prepare to spend that time to try to make it work. And if you are lucky and you have a lot of pen feeds available for you to try, you're going to be great. Don't try to force fit the feed and the nib into the section, because you'll end up breaking it. This one actually has been cracked, I can see, by my stupidity and eagerness to make this work. I crammed it in too much. So be careful when you're doing that. So again, you need to have a good nib. For God's sake, these things don't stay put. You need to have a good nib. You have to have a slightly smaller feed than what originally came with the pen, and you have to find a pen. So you essentially need at least 3 donors to your Frankenpen: the point, the barrel and cap, and the feed. Usually have to come from 3 separate sources. And I'll talk about another element in a moment when I get those props ready. Just a bit. Here is our donor pen, which is an off-brand Morton pen made in the 20s. Nothing good about it particularly, other than that it's a big pen that hopefully will work for us. I found a feed that did not come with it. This swims in the opening, but with the dip pen nib, the shape of the dip pen nib, it will be a pretty nice fit, I think. So there we go. And then of course you try it out to see if in fact it's, the way you like it to be, and let's pretend it is. The final thing you have to make sure you do correctly is you have to make sure that the pen nib is not going to end up coming into contact with the cap of the pen when you screw the cap on. And to do that, you have to find out where the inner cap is and where the back of the cap is. So you measure it with your handy ruler, and this one, in fact, the very top of the pen is clear. Sometimes you find pens that the top of the pen is very much further down from the top, but this one is hollow all the way to the very top, and so that's good. We have a lot of space, because usually the pen nib on these Victorian pens are quite long, and they'll stick out a little bit further than a normal fountain pen nib would. So here I do have the clearance, so when I screw the cap on, I won't break the nib in doing that, in so doing, screwing it in. So consequently, at the end of the day, we do have a working Frankenpen, and again, the Frankenpen allows you to have a nice shaded line with a beautiful thin flexible nib, but you probably will find that no matter how slowly you write, you may end up causing the pen to skip. The ink will not flow fast enough for your fully shaded letters. So you might end up having to dip them anyway. But you could write an entire envelope with one dip rather than one letter at a time. So there you go. That's how I make Frankenpens. And this was a relatively nice result. This little item right here. Ta-da! Frankenpen. I'm going to show you some close-ups, I hope, of some of my Frankenpen nibs here. Very flexible, springy nibs. And this one fights back. It gives in, but not without a little bit of a fight. And it's just amazing, as you can see. Just a beautiful pen. And you can see that it gives out a lot of ink. There's a lot of ink on those little dollops. It'll take an hour and a half for this to dry. But what fun. Now this one looks similar to the ones I just showed you, but this one really gives in much too easily, and consequently it's harder to control. You have to be very careful because you could very easily press down too far and break the nib. I like to have the pen have a little bit more of a fight. But amazing, these old nibs, and still working after more than 120 years. Another pen, similar to the one I just tried, has not as thick a thick, and it still fights, pushes back, but it's just, again, a beautiful pen. Nib, fine to broad. I'll do something more pretty with these in a moment, but I just want to show you again the springiness that they have. And it's quite fun. Hairline fine to just a mop of a thick line. Here's another one that's very giving. The feed is hitting the paper here, so you're getting a little bit of lines. The camera is in between me and the nib, so I'm writing at a very weird angle here. I generally prefer my flexible nibs to require me to press down a little harder to get the line that's thick. I like to have a little bit of a workout calligraphing envelopes. There you go. I'm writing on graph paper here so the camera can focus on something. When my hand is here, it wants to focus on my hand. So anyway, here's why does that do that? Something. Nice pushback on this pen. Let's try another one here. I'm sort of writing the same way that I did before, but this pen gives in too quick, and it's not as much fun to write with. Now this one has really nice spring to it. This is pushing back as I write, and it's allowing me to actually have more control because it's fighting me in a really nice way. So I have to work a little bit more. I have to be more mindful of what I'm doing. Another one similar to that was this one. And this one gives in, but there's enough pushback that I can still have control. It was a little scratchy though. You can hear that, I'm sure. And then finally this last one here. This one is this gives in really too easily, and consequently it's not as pleasant to write with, even though the lines are beautiful. And it's way too loosey-goosey for my tastes. But maybe it has some purpose in life. Just have to figure out what it is. Keeps the ink manufacturers happy because it uses so much of it. Well, there you go.